You're listening to an i4AI podcast, brought to you by Persona and podcast host, Danny Lytics, aka Laura Adele.
Three, two, one. POCs are an important part of the sales process because they allow us to showcase the following things. One, we can showcase our solution and how it can bring value to the customer. Two, it allows us, through the proof of concept, to address any objections that they have ahead of time and have that competitive conversation using a practical example. This is important because our competitors are certainly having that conversation and highlighting to the customer any gaps that they perceive in our product. We want to be able to have that conversation ourselves with them and be able to outline the benefits and the business value gained from using our end-to-end solution stack. You don't want to fall prey to a parity by parity feature comparison conversation. Nobody wins in that scenario because you're not showcasing value to the customer. You're just talking about things that something can do, and it's very hard for a customer to then put it into the frame of their business. Instead, remember that the most successful POCs frame their world, their environment, their business objectives, not Microsoft's. A proof of concept is a tool that we can use to paint the art of the possible and showcase what a future state might look like. But it's not always the right or appropriate solution that we would recommend for what you're trying to get done. So there are a few scenarios in which you want to use a POC. One, if you have clearly defined pain points and a use case with the customer. And that doesn't mean you have to wait for them to give that to you. We should be driving and helping them understand what they're trying to solve. And there's some tools you can use to do that. Because a proof of concept is time-boxed, or at least the most successful ones should be time-boxed, you have to scope and create a very crisp use case scenario and problem statement in order to solve. One of the tools that you can use to do that is called the 5 whys. And the 5 whys allow you to get down to the root cause of a pain point. Let me exemplify this for you. I'm going to use a scenario that I've used with my child. So your child comes home crying. Your first question, why are you crying? I fell off my bike. Why did you fall off your bike? Well, I was wobbling around and wasn't very steady. Why were you wobbling around and not so steady? Well, I'm pretty new to riding my bike. And I really, I just fell off. Well, why did you get injured? I wasn't wearing my helmet. And so the root cause of the problem of why they're crying is because they weren't wearing their protective gear. Not that they were riding their bike, not that they were wobbly on their bike, but they didn't have their gear on. And that is thus what caused them to be crying when they came home, which was your initial question. So whereas they may have presented to you a use case that said, I'm crying, solve that problem for me, the reality is, the problem is actually, I wasn't wearing my safety gear, solve my problem for me, and that's very doable and solvable. Remember that a proof of concept to be successful has to be sticky. It has to be something that they're not just going to throw away at the end of the trial period, but it's something that they want to move to production. And so let me give you another scenario of when it's not good to use a POC and how you can turn the not good to use a POC still into an opportunity. And so when a customer comes to you and says, I want to solve for predictive maintenance. I am a manufacturing industry customer. I have a shop floor, and I want you to solve my predictive maintenance challenges. The reality is there are many sub-projects that lead up to having true end-to-end predictive maintenance. And it's our job to help them scope and understand that. And sometimes you'll find out that, no, they actually have a project that's bigger than a bread box, and it's not a good example of a proof of concept. But that doesn't mean we just say no and throw it away. It means that we recommend to them one of our great partners, ISVs and SIs, that we have through our GPS organization or our MCS organization, our consulting services. It's through there that they can then take and contract with the customer to build out all of those different use cases that would equate to what a customer finds value in terms of what they dub predictive maintenance. If you can then pick one sub use case from that predictive maintenance scenario to work on, that would be your best solution. So for example, how do you do that? Let's ask the 5 whys of that same customer. So customer says they want predictive maintenance. Why do you want predictive maintenance? I'm getting too many calls into my call center regarding defects or my product isn't working. Well, why are you getting too many calls about the product not working? Our product is being shipped out with defects. Why is your product being shipped out with defects? We never installed the camera, or the camera that we have on our maintenance line isn't picking up the defects before we ship it out. Why is it not picking up those defects? Because it's outdated. And so now we've taken the predictive maintenance sample, drilled it down to actually what's driving the call center calls. So they may have come to you and said, I want to reduce my call center calls because OpEx is too high. And the reality is that that would be a very large onion to peel back and understand the root cause of. But by asking the 5 whys, we now understand that the true problem is outdated hardware or camera on the production line that isn't picking up the parts per million defects that they expect before the product gets shipped out. That's a very doable project for computer vision to come in and help pick up those defects using computer vision before the item gets shipped out. And in fact, even tying together a bot to it, so when people call into the call center, they're immediately, receiving a certain message for who they are. And by then, if the model's been built in the computer vision, we can also route them to fix that accordingly. But if we've implemented our project correctly, we will have caught that issue before they even ever call in. So there's a way to stage it out in multi-phases where maybe we initially implement the bot. That helps us route the calls to the cheapest channel possible while we're fixing and implementing our new camera set. Once that's there, we set a goal of, let's say, reducing our defects per parts of million to 5 or less, let's say a 6 Sigma approach, and then we have a measurable goal to achieve. The only way that we can do this, though, is by leaning in and showing curiosity with the customer. And that doesn't mean just trying to look like we're the most knowledgeable person in the room. We have our use case now, but we need to gain the customer confidence. And it means leaning in and actively listening. So you should be hearing their voice more than yours. And your voice should be there to ask why. Ask the 5 whys. Ask as many questions and show the curiosity, because that really engenders the customer to your side, building confidence, showing your commitment. And in fact, if you prepare ahead of time and understand a little bit about their industry, even better. Remember, being curious shows you care about their business. Don't leave a meeting without understanding who are the folks in that room and whether or not they're truly comfortable with what you've presented. In order to do that, one, you need to make sure you have the right audience in the room. And that's not just IT. Believe you me, in the shop floor example, it isn't IT who's making the decision on what to buy to put in that shop floor. It is your supply chain leads, it is maybe your chief retail officer, or whoever's in charge of making sure those products get made, with the least defects, per parts per million. It is not IT. What IT does is take that product once it's recommended and requested by the business, and they implement it to ensure that they have appropriate uptime requirements and backup and security and all the important infrastructure requirements that make a solution sticky. Again, something that we're very good at Microsoft. And so if that business person isn't in the room, you're not going to have the right decision maker who, by the way, has the checkbook to pay for our solution. So you want them to be at the table. It shows skin in the game from the customer as well when they invite the right appropriate business stakeholder leaders to the room. IT certainly should have their leaders in the room as well because they do still have a voice. But it's those business leaders that if they're not there, you should not have the meeting. And before you leave the room, after you've had that POC meeting, you should ask them, is everybody in this room willing to move this into production if we achieve all of the goals we've set out here? And if anybody says no or isn't answering you or appears a little aloof, maybe you should ask them, how can I help you get more comfortable with what I've presented today? Is there anything that I have not presented today that you need to see in order to make this decision? And then you should always leave the question of, would you be willing to move this POC to production if we successfully achieve all the targets that we've laid out today, that bring you to that level of comfort? Would you be willing to move this to production? And if they say no, then you need to keep asking the whys and the questions in order to get them comfortable. Use that experience not just to get them to be comfortable, but to show them that you care and build that customer confidence. And lastly, the key and the name of the game is to show value quickly. How do we do that? Well, there is a ton of one-click POC test drives available today on GitHub. So whether your customer scenario is related
to... Loved what you've heard on this week's episode? Well, the answer is simple. It would mean the world to us if you could head over to iTunes and leave us a 5-star review and feedback. Spreading the word really is the best way to grow our podcast and achieve even greater things. Thank you.